Well, hello everybody. It's Enoch Chapman, and I'm here to do a virtual flute lesson. It's actually entitled your very first Native American flute lesson, so I'm really excited about that. Welcome to all the people who may be watching on YouTube Live or on Facebook Live. I'm actually broadcasting off of getvocal.com, so if you want to check out my channel on Get Vocal and see all the stuff that I'm doing over there, it's getvocal.com/channel/ native music enthusiast. And yeah, you can see all the stuff that's coming up and all scheduled and everything. Is kind of all exciting. But I am simulcasting onto YouTube and I am simulcasting onto Facebook. Unfortunately, we don't have sync set up so that if you're asking questions on either of those two platforms, I won't be able to see them yet. But if you want to ask a question on the Get Vocal platform, please head over there, jump in, and ask questions as we go along. Because I think it'll be really fun to answer your questions if you have any coming up. So this is your very first Native American wood flute lesson. What are you going to expect? Well, I've been teaching lessons now for, oh golly, a little over 35 years. And for every lesson when I first start, I always ask my students the very same question. What is it that you want to get out of lessons with me? What is it that you're expecting? What do you want to accomplish as we take lessons? And I think it's important to have people answer that question. What is it that you want to do when you're here with us as I'm teaching you and I'm giving you some guidance? What is it that you want to learn? Is it just a particular song, or do you want to learn a concept? Do you want to be able to play in front of people without being, kind of nervous and being a little bit worried about what's going to happen? Do you want to just be able to pick up any flute and just play along with whatever's happening in the moment? Do you want to be able to play with crowds? All these are good questions and good thoughts about what is it that you want to get out of a lesson. And no matter what lessons you go into, always ask that question. What is it that I want to do? If it's just to appease your parents because they're paying for piano lessons, which I did for many years, that's okay too. But when you find something that you really enjoy, something that you're passionate about, something that you love, and you just want to jump in and play it, man, there's nothing better. There really is nothing better. So what is it that you want to get out of playing the flute? Is it inner peace? A lot of people like the idea of inner peace and the harmonies that come with the flute, and it gives them a relaxing feeling. So maybe that's what you're looking for. Maybe it's just to be able to play with friends, have someone pick up a guitar, you can pick up your flute and play along. That's cool too. So what we'd like to do then is, I can't hear you unless you respond back to me, but I don't really know what it is that you want to do. So I'm going to try to cover a bunch of bases to let you know here's what you can do. Here are the potentials, here are the possibilities, and here's what you need to do in order to actually, start playing the flute and actually get proficient at it and get better. So let's start with the idea of your flute. Here is your flute. Now, your flute is made up of a number of different components, and it's good to know what these components are as you're starting, because if anything, you just got to get familiar with your instrument. The wood flute is made out of wood. Now, the Native American flute can actually be made out of a lot of different types of materials. I like the wood flutes, but they can also be made out of clay. They can be made out of PVC pipe. They can be made out of anything that's actually kind of hollow and allows you to create a whistle so that you can, make music out of the flute. But the flute, it has a lot of different components to, well, it's not necessarily components, but it has a lot of different ideas and feelings to it the more you start playing. So let's just say you're buying a wood flute. Now, wood is a very it's a living organism. It's a very vibrant organism, but it also changes with the way that moisture is in the air. It changes with the way that you hold it. It changes with the way you put polish on it and how you care for and tend it. So the wood itself can actually change underneath you while you're playing and make a different sound, and that's good. Well, the big thing about the Native American wood flute is that when you start playing it, it starts conforming to you. It starts making you and your breath part of the instrument, which is really cool. And that changes the sound. It makes it you, it makes it part of you. This instrument is very, very, very much attached to the performer. So, yes, I can share it with somebody else. And, if I need to, I can give you the ability to play my flute. But it's over time, this flute will kind of adjust to how I am and how I play. The more I put moisture into it, the more I breathe into the air hole to actually make the flute come alive, the more it will actually, you know, adhere to like my moisture, and actually it'll change the way the flute plays. And that's a good thing. That's just something to be aware of. But it's also important to note that if it's a wood flute, you don't want to leave it in direct sunlight. You don't want to put it in some place that's really, damp and dusky, because that's going to change it as well, right? The more wet it gets, the more it can warp and actually, change and alter the pitches of what you're playing. Same thing with it being in really, really hot weather, is that can kind of dry out the flute and actually make it brittle, so that when you pick it up, it actually can break in your hands. It's a possibility. So it's a wood is a very vibrant and living idea. So as you're playing the flute for the first time, you might want to get used to the idea that this is going to change over time the more you blow into it, and that's a good thing. And it can also change if you put it into the wrong environment. So take care of where you put your flute. Don't leave out in direct sunlight or someplace where a lot of liquid could spill on it. If you can, put it into like a bag, or put it into someplace like a sheath that will allow it to be protected. And that's a good way to actually start with your flute. Now, the flute has a lot of little components to it, and we'll discuss those right now. For the most part, we have the body, and the body is just the whole body of the flute. It's just the whole shaft. And sometimes the body is unique. And sometimes it's not just one, but sometimes there's two or three, and there's multiples of what you can have with a flute. When you have two or three bodies, those are called drone flutes. And with a drone flute, what that means is it plays the extra bodies will play one or possibly two sounds. Those are the drones, and they, will sustain while you're playing all the other notes on the other flute. But that's important. We have a body, and that's really, one of the key elements. We have the head of the flute, and at the head of the flute, we have a little hole up here that we blow into. This is where our wind goes into. It's our open hole and our breath hole, and how we create the music coming forth. We also have this little guy up top, and this thing here. This is a fetish. And a fetish can be any number of different things. It can be animals. It can be just an artistic art form. This one actually has an eagle on it, and it has a little turquoise button on top. The button doesn't do anything. It's just there for decoration. But it has an eagle on it, and this makes it look kind of pretty. Now, the fetish is important because underneath the fetish is actually a little wind tunnel, and that's where the whistle comes into play. So you blow into the air, you blow air into the hole, and that air kind of gets pushed up into this area here, and the fetish covers the area where the wind creates the whistle, and that generates the sound out of this little guy here. This is the sound hole right here. You can see that. Now, this is where the sound of the flute comes from. It doesn't come from the end, which a lot of people think it comes from this part here. This is actually just a way for the air to kind of flow through the pipe, and it doesn't really it doesn't really do anything. And I'll show you that. I'm just going to cover up these holes, and I'm going to play, and I'm just going to cover the hole. So I'm still getting sound out of it, but it's just a little bit different pitch because the air is stopping. But that's the big thing, is the sound still comes out. If I cover this hole, this little guy right here, which is a sound hole, if I cover that, then no sound's going to be generated at all. And you can see that once this guy gets covered up, all of a sudden all sound stops. That's because that's where the sound and the noise is being generated, is from this hole right here, which is a sound hole. And then we have our fingerings. And depending upon what type of flute you have, you can have 5, 6, or even 7 fingerings. And the 7th fingering is usually a hole in the back. We won't go into that because that actually gets a little bit more complicated. For the most part, you will see a 6 or 5-hole flute. Now, the 5th hole on 5-hole flutes, what happens is this hole here, this hole right here, this 3rd hole is covered. So you get 2 holes up top and 3 holes on the bottom. However, on a 6-hole flute, you get all 6 holes. So you actually get 3 holes up top and 3 holes on the bottom. And that's important, right? Because this covering, and we'll talk about this here in 1 second, this covering, this missing hole on a 5-hole flute actually changes a little bit of what you can do with the instrument. If you don't have the 6th hole, there's a lot of notes you won't be able to play. And that's fine. It's because you can still play a lot of great things with the 5-hole flute. It's just that when you have that 6th hole, all of a sudden a lot of other different options are available to you. And that's where things can kind of get a little bit of fun, is when you have some more opportunities possibilities and more options available to you. So now we have our holes, and we've discussed that. Now, how do you hold the flute? Well, there's different ways to hold the flute. Some hold it like this, and some hold it like this. What I recommend to people, and how I tell them if they're going to start playing for the first time, is to have your hands in this type of fashion where your strong hand, whatever your strong hand is, whether your right hand or left hand, is on the bottom, and they're covering these holes on the bottom, and your weak hand covers these holes up top. That's kind of the recommendation that I tell it. And there's a lot of other people who recommend other ways, but that's what I recommend: is you put your strong hand on the bottom and your weak hand on top. For some people, they always say put your right hand on the bottom and your left hand on top, but I think it's better if you actually put your strong hand on the bottom and your weak hand on top, and not necessarily have it always be, right hand, left hand in that fashion. It will make it easier for you in the long run if it's your strong hand versus your weak hand. And so that's kind of important, is to hold your flute like this, where you have your strong hand on the bottom and your weak hand on top, and they cover the holes. Now, this flute here is a little bit bigger than a lot of starter flutes, or flutes that I would recommend people to start off with. This flute here is an E flute, and I picked it because my name starts with E, and I just like the name. So I picked it that way. But if you're starting off and you get like a G flute, and this is my G flute, and my G flute, it might be hard to see because it's black on black, and so maybe you'll not be able to see it. But the holes in my G flute are a lot smaller than what my holes on my E flute are, and that makes it easier for people to start off, especially when they're playing, to cover up holes that are a little bit smaller, so you don't have to kind of work so hard with your fingers. The more adept you get, the better you get at being able to play, the more proficient you get, the easier it's going to be for you to actually learn how to cover the holes and get your fingers on the holes. When you start talking about larger flutes, you end up getting larger holes. When you get smaller flutes, you end up getting smaller holes. For example, I have this little flute up here, which is a pocket flute, and it has a lot of small holes on it. And you can see that the holes are, very easy to put your fingers on. You'll also notice that this is a 5-hole flute. Like I said, that third hole is missing, so it's a 5-hole flute. And it's much easier to put, cover your fingers on that type of thing than it is to cover your fingers on this type of flute. The holes are much smaller. So that's something important to realize as you're learning to play, and as you're picking out flutes, and as you're getting involved, that there might be some differences or discrepancies in the hole sizes. And so, find a flute that works for you. And the A flutes are a great flute to start off with. They're just absolutely fantastic. I love the A flutes because they're just the right size. They sound really nice, and they work with a lot of other different keys and a lot of other different music out there. So the A flutes are fantastic. The F sharp flutes are what are considered the Native American flute. It's considered the actual sound of Native American in the F sharp world, because it's a lot more earthy in tone. It has a really cool, distinct feeling. So the F sharp flutes are a great flute to start off with, as well as the Gs. So you either can use an a G, or an F sharp flute. That's what I would recommend. I wouldn't recommend starting off with an E. I think the holes are a little bit too big. But again, my name starts with E, so I figured, hey, might as well use a flute that has the same letter as my name, because why not? That cool. So now we've talked about your hand placement and your and some of the aspects of the flute. So we talked about the finger holes, we talked about the fetish, we talked about the sound hole, we talked about the air hole, what you blow into, this hole at the end, which is just lets the air come out. And you'll notice on this flute here, there's just a lot of little decorations, these little turquoise beads. They're just adornments. They don't really mean anything. They don't do anything to affect the sound. They don't do anything to make it so that it changes the pitch. They're just there to make the thing look pretty. So if you want something that's a very pretty flute, I recommend getting something with some nice adornments on it. The turquoise are always really nice. You'll see here there's little carvings at the end of it to make it look a little nicer. It's just the idea of trying to pretty up the design. This is a great flute, and I think it sounds fantastic. Now, getting to your first sound. We've talked about your finger positions. We've talked about how, this hole up here that you can blow into. Now, when you blow into the flute, when you're going to make your first sound, all you need to do is cover the hole up with your mouth and kind of sigh. That's all you need to do. Just go, okay, so that's your first sound. That's it. It's just a sigh, okay? You don't have to do anything else. Cool. And that's your first sound. That's that you're well on your way to becoming an expert because now you've made your very first sound on the flute. And the cool thing about that is that's really how we can play the flute is we can do it through these kind of sigh motions. Whoo, whoo, whoo. And if you use that whoo sound, it's going to make you be able to have a much more controlled version of your breath for the flute. Now, the trick behind the Native American Wood Flute and the trick behind playing it is all about your breath. It's all about breath control. So if you're feeling happy and you have like a really excited breath, it's going to come across in the flute. Feeling sad and you have like maybe a little bit wider breath, it's going to come across in the flute. It's all about how you breathe. And if you sigh into it, or if you just do that whoo sound, you can create like a very steady stream. Now, breathing's important. We've been doing it almost all of our lives. So we have to know that breathing's important, right? But there are different ways to take a breath. And, let's not really go into too much depth of how we're going to breathe. Maybe we'll focus on our second lesson. But it's good to know that breathing and how we breathe is really vital and important to the way that we play the Native American wood flute. Just know that for the most part, when you want to breathe, you want to use your diaphragm, and that's your muscle that's like right below your belly. You want that diaphragm to be active and actually be engaged in what you're doing. I kind of hate that word, engaged in what you're doing, but it's really kind of a good description of what you want to happen. For the most part, we don't really think about breathing, we just do it. So it's not like, oh, okay, I'm just going to take a breath. But when you want to focus your breath and actually get a really good pure sound out of the flute, you want to inhale as much as possible, get as much air into your lungs, have those lungs expand, and use your diaphragm to push down so you can get as much air as possible, and then breathe into the flute. You can see that I've created a long, steady tone. And these are really good things to practice, is trying to create a long, steady tone. The more steady you can get your tone, the longer it becomes, the easier your flute's going to have as it transitions through each of the individual notes. And that's a key thing to start practicing right now, are these long, steady tones. So first, take a good breath and then try to get a stopwatch or a timer of some sort and just see if you can go for 5 seconds. Now, 5 seconds may not seem very long, but when you're trying to blow into your flute, it actually could be a very long time. So here's 5 seconds. Okay, steady, even as we go along. That's what we're looking for. Once you have 5 seconds down, see if you can go a little bit longer. Maybe add 7 seconds or 10 seconds until you can start to get to this really, really long breath control. Now, if you haven't learned how to breathe using your diaphragm and building up your lung muscles, then ultimately this is going to be really tricky for you to actually get to long time frames. But 5 seconds is good, 10 seconds is good, 15 seconds is good. To be able to get to really, really long, you're actually going to want to practice your breathing. And again, we won't get into that too much right now, but you will want to practice your breathing. And breathing is going to become important here as we play the flute. So let's see if I can get to, a long time. I probably can. I'm not very good and I'm a little out of breath, but let's see what happens. So I'm going to inhale. Well, so I'm going to swallow first because actually I'm going to take a little bit of water. So I apologize for this, but this is my water cup. Okay, so now I'm going to inhale. So it was about 20 seconds. Not very long, but long enough, right? I mean, that's kind of a long passage. Now, the cool thing is if you can actually do that and keep it steady, then you can start building on your notes and make your notes kind of fluid as you move through. You don't have to take a breath for every single note. You don't have to sigh for every single note. You can make things very continuous and fluid. Let's talk about the first notes that we should play. Okay. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, like in 5 note flutes. Now this finger is gone. This hole is gone, right? So on the 5 hole flutes, you have 2 on the top and 3 on the bottom. You're missing the third hole on the top of the flute. Now, for a 6 hole flute or a 5 hole flute, what you do is you put your finger on that hole and you leave it there. This is called an anchor finger. And with our anchor finger, we just leave it there and we don't have to worry about ever moving it. It's always going to stay anchored to that position. Now, when I move my fingers and I just take them off one at a time, starting with the lowest one, so here to here to here to here to here, I'm actually going to create a scale. And these notes are in a pentatonic scale, which means there's only 5 notes in the scale, and all those notes are going to sound good together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play, and I'm just going to take off each of my fingers individually one at a time. You notice you actually get a pretty nice scale. And that is your very first scale to practice. It is a pentatonic scale, and it's a minor pentatonic scale if we're going to get more accurate. Now, the pentatonic scale is a 5 note scale, unlike what we normally play when we play like piano or play other scales from other instruments. That's called a diatonic scale, which is 7 notes. 5 note scale is pentatonic. The traditional scale we normally play is diatonic or 7 notes. So with the pentatonic scale, what ends up happening is all the notes actually sound pretty good together. There's no outliers. There's nothing that makes you go, oh man, that's not going to work. And as long as you can remember that all I have to do is move my fingers up, you can actually start creating some really kind of cool music by just going up and down the scale. So I lied a little and actually played a duplicate note, but you get the gist. It's just up and down the scale. And the cool thing is, once you start learning your scales, all of a sudden now you can start to say, oh, well, here's a good note, and here's a good note, and here's a good note. And maybe I can put those notes together and jump around the scale a little bit. And so that's the idea is now that you have this kind of pattern down, now that I understand a little bit of how I can move back and forth inside of my scale, now I can create like music for myself. And that's when things get really fun. So the very first things that we want to do to be able to start playing more effectively is first, we want to be able to understand how our flute works, right? Okay, where am I going to blow in? How am I going to hold this thing? And what type of flute am I going to expect? What's the idea of me over and over again blowing into it? How's that going to affect the instrument? What do I have to do to prepare myself for the differences of temperature and other like ideas? So that's the first thing, is understanding your flute. That's important. Number two, we want to be able to blow into the flute, and we want to be able to have these long tones that we can start creating really cool melodies out of and really cool sounds out of. So it's this idea of long tones. I am going to take a deep breath, and then I'm just going to blow in and see how long I can hold that note. And practice that over and over again so you can get better at it. The longer you hold a note, see if you can go like 1 extra second, see if you can go 2 more extra seconds, and just see how long you can inhale and exhale for. And this is actually a really good thing to kind of create your sound. How are you going to sound when you play your instrument? Understanding how we breathe is vitally important to understanding how we're going to create the best sound for us. And the third thing that we've talked about today, and the thing that's going to help you get along, starting to create, more music and starting to get more exciting out there, avenues out there for you, is understanding how to play the notes. And we're going to talk about the scale. And this first scale is that minor pentatonic scale. The key here is the anchor finger. We're never moving that finger. That finger is always going to stay there. We don't ever have to change it. Oh, if you want to, you can put a piece of tape over it if you want to. Some flute manufacturers actually give you little pieces of leather that you can just put over that, and you never have to think about it. But the idea is your finger is always going to stay inside of that anchor position. It's never going to move. And then when I move my fingers additionally up off of the individual holes, I will create a really nice scale that everything's going to sound good. And now you have a really pretty scale, something you can noodle around with, play around with on your own time. And I think that's really cool, because that's where things start getting fun, is when you start creating your own music and getting out there and actually start expressing it to other people, right? With the stuff that we have created for our website and the etudes that we've written, we are focusing on the lower hand only. So our very first 20 etudes that we've written for out there for you to pick up and consume and try to practice and learn cool pieces all have to deal with just the lower hand. And we wrote 20 etudes in just the lower hand. We're going to have another 20 etudes here shortly on the upper hand, so you can learn more techniques and more skills to help you improve as a player. The whole concept here is to try to get you to get out and play, improve your skills, increase your musical toolkit, and become a better performer, because all of that's going to wrap up into the idea of you being a amazing flute player and getting more people excited about it and more people playing because you are doing something really, really cool. So again, the flute, knowing a little bit of the components that we talked about, the real key one here, the sound hole, that's where the sound comes from. Handling your flute, putting your strong hand on the bottom, your weak hand on the top, taking a deep breath and learning how to get those long tones going. And playing your first scale, moving your fingers up one at a time off of these different holes so that you can just play that first scale without moving your anchor finger. Keep your anchor finger in check. You always want to have your anchor finger, so don't move your anchor finger. But it's gonna be good once you start playing it. So that was your very first flute lesson. And hopefully, if you have a flute and you're going out and playing it, you will enjoy it as much as I do. If you want to get more information about how to play the flute, check out our website at nativemusicenthusiast.com. I wish I had a graphics I could just pop up on the screen for you, but I completely forgot about doing graphics. So maybe next time. But nativemusicenthusiast.com is where you can check out our website with a lot more information that's going on. You can find us on YouTube at Native Music Enthusiast on YouTube, which we have a lot of videos up there about things that we are playing and how accompaniments for our etudes. We have a number of etudes that are available for you to purchase and actually learn more skills by actually playing through songs. And so we're just trying to get you out there and playing and trying to get you excited for everything that's going on in the world of the Native American wood flute, because it is a great instrument. So thank you very much for checking us out. I hope this was a good lesson for you. I hope you were able to learn something. And we're going to do this about the first and third, hopefully the first and third Wednesday of each month. So check us out again coming up here on, I believe it's the, let's see, what is 14 plus 2, the 16th of the month. Hopefully you will see some more stuff coming out, and you'll be able to pick up another cool skill and everything. So until then, I hope you guys are doing great, playing well, and yeah, I will check you guys out the next time. Thank you very much.